This is Katrin with Disability Rights New York. Welcome to our podcast, Empire State of Rights, where we bring you information on the most relevant topics regarding disability rights and advocacy. Today, we welcome John Robinson, CEO of Our Ability, Inc. He's here to discuss current trends and developments in technology and its relationship to accessibility for the disability community. John, thank you for joining us today.
Hi, Katrin. It's great to be here. How are you?
I'm great. And so when we're talking about accessibility, you and I just had the opportunity to have a full panel discussion at Over It, and we can drop the link to that YouTube in the notes of the podcast. But we talked a lot about accessibility and why it matters. And we really just scratched the surface on so many different topics. Let's start by talking about the overall question, right? Why is it important? And I just feel like we need to spend so much time just on that.
Yeah, accessibility is important because we should want to include everyone in society into everything, right? If you believe in freedom, if you believe in equal opportunity, and you believe in equal access, then whether you're a marginalized population subject or not, you would want everybody to have an equal opportunity to success in a capitalistic society. That is how capitalism grows. That's how our culture grows. That's how the history of Western civilization and the United States of America in specific have grown. It's because more people make more products, consume more products and services, which begets more people doing the same thing. That is how our economy grows. And as long as we're in a capitalist democratic republic, then that's what we should want. A big part of that population is made up of people with disabilities. There's a variety of numbers out there, but anywhere between 1 out of 5, 1 out of 6 people have some sort of disability and will age into disability over time. As we get older, as medicine improves in extending our lives, we're going to age into disability. We're going to have mobility issues. We're going to have medical issues. We're going to have sight, hearing issues, or we have been born or have acquired any of those as well. And so if we are 1 out of 5 people with a disability, then that is a large part of our population. And that means to increase our society, we need to incorporate those of us that have a disability in that, both from employment, education, products and services that are purchased and sold, and all of the above. And as far as what we're talking about today, accessibility provides a connotation of curb cuts and elevators and certain elements of society that have been really successful since the ADA was signed in 1990. But what we're talking about now is going beyond that, such as internet, such as technology, such as cell phone usage, such as documentation, communication methods. We're talking about ways that we all use to communicate and engage in 2023. And those pieces, those elements do also have to include all parts of society. And so that means we need to welcome those with mobility impairments, such as myself, those that may have dexterity impairments, those that may have hearing impairments or visual impairments, or be on the spectrum in neurodiversity. So we need to include all so that when we code, when we document, when we record, we are welcoming everybody so that we can include everybody in the growth of society.
I like so many things that you touched on. I mean, especially in terms of whether it's aging into a disability or a temporary disability, and also things that we use today that maybe were first even created for a person with a disability, which is now being used all over. Like I think about ramps, I think about text, I think about how when we are looking at the things that we're using as we move forward organically in this society, many things started out as an accessible accommodation for someone with a disability. And when we think about how we're aging along with the trajectory of technology, right? Like we are not in a static state of accessibility, and we never will be. things are always going to change. People are always going to change. People are going to grow. And as they do with technology, and we've seen this, right? We've seen how as technology is moving, it is giving us access to more things. And in that, when we talk about access, if we're not including everyone, to your point, we're missing a whole group of our communities. And when we're talking about websites and documentation, let's talk a little bit about some of the common things that we see now when we're looking at things through the lens of accessibility. What are some examples of areas that organizations should be looking at to make sure that they are accessible?
Yeah, I think it's a great question, Katrin, and there's a whole lot that we should be considering. And I want to start out by saying this, that most of us are business owners, most of us are website owners, most of anybody in a business environment has built a website for some purpose. I think you need to give yourself a little bit of grace to realize that you don't know what you don't know, right? And so we at Our Ability, even though we do what we do, we fall into that as well. But it's when you're confronted with something that's inaccessible, that's when you need to build it properly. And we've really taken that to heart. So things that web developers and sales managers and business owners and anybody that is touching a digital presence for an intranet or internet, you need to consider accessibility. And so what are things to be thinking about? You need to be thinking about, first and foremost, building from the beginning with accessibility in mind. If you're coding something new for the first time, if you have a new page, if you have a new website, if you have a new product, new service, and it's coming ahead in the future, build accessibility into it right now. It's always easier to build at the beginning than fix a problem at the end. If you have an existing situation, you need to consider, is it accessible for people on the spectrum? Is it accessible with color coordination if somebody has color sensitivity? Is it accessible especially for screen readers? Do you have videos on your website that should have audio transcription for the blind community, or does it have open captions for the deaf community, capital D? So does it have ASL? Do you have ASL for the deaf community built in somewhere for that population as well? Because as we've talked about before, ASL and English are not the same, and there's a translation between the two. So these are things that we're thinking about. In our specific examples of what we've seen and what we've experienced, a lot of websites are trying to be retrofitted for accessibility in mind. And so there's a couple of ways to do that. You can recode what you've built, or you can try to figure out a plugin that's successful in helping you accommodate a situation that's retrofitted. I will caution everybody here. There are some companies out there that have built overlays and plugins that say they make your website accessible. I will tell you, these companies to a company are hated, and I mean that as strongly as I can, hated by the disability community. They don't necessarily make a website accessible. Be very careful on that. What we have done at Our Ability is try very hard to, one, consult with entities on building at the beginning, to consult with entities on how can you retrofit properly with all of our partners in mind in the disability space. 3, what documentation or what HTML do you have online now that needs to be remediated for accessibility purposes? 4, are you under the umbrella of Section 508, meaning are you a subcontractor or contractor to the federal government or receive federal insurance somehow? And your documentation must be accessible as it goes out, i.e. PDFs, Word documents, HTML pages. These are the things that we're thinking about right now in web and document remediation as we talk to more and more entities. And then the sort of final step of that is language. What language do we all use? How can we do a better job in incorporating non-ableist language in our digital footprint, digital presence, and email. And so this is part of that work that we're doing.
And, there's so many things that you just hit on that are important and huge topics in and of themselves, right? So we're talking about the guidelines and what sections apply to and all that. All of that information is in fact available as resources online, and we'll drop the links to those in the notes of the podcast. And I really love what you started with, the idea of what you don't know, right? And we talked a little bit about this. We've talked about this a lot, right? Where there's no way for all of us to know everything about every topic. And when we start to move into the space of accessibility, whether it's online or in person, as we've seen when putting together events, if you don't know the answer, and you don't want to ask the question because you're afraid to say it wrong, I'm here to tell you, and I know you'll say it, we have all done it. We have all said something, and we've said it, in a way that wasn't necessarily as eloquent as we would have liked it to have been. It was a little rough coming out, and often it's because we're just not sure what words are we supposed to use. But if we don't ask the questions, if we don't say, is this accessible for you? And to be able to be open to the answers, I feel like, that is another issue in and of itself. And there are so many resources out there. And I know that we talked a lot about them in the panel event last week, and we can drop more of those resources here. But really, the questions can be asked, right? Like, especially, you are so literally accessible with questions. If someone has them, to reach out and say, hey, John, what do you think of this? And how we as a community are really integrating those resources into the work that we do, right? So people can find the answers. And it's really interesting to see the way that even these conversations are evolving organically with different organizations. And from my perspective, I think it's for a couple of reasons, right? And one of them is we've talked about how accessibility within a business structure and how it affects your bottom line, right? Which at the end of the day, as business owners, as people who are interested in making money in order to support their life, let's talk a little bit about how how impactful, and as Dan O'Leary from Over It said, solving for accessibility changes everything. Talk a little bit about that and how business owners would be able to see the evidence of this.
Yeah, I think that's a great question. And I think the first image I'd like to sort of put in everybody's mind is, imagine you're sitting at home and you're watching Netflix. Do you have the captions on? Have you gotten used to captions in your media? Or you're out going to a restaurant and there is a ramp or a zero level entryway rather than a bunch of archaic stairs. And I say that living in Albany, New York, which is an old city, there's been some advancements in some of the parts that it makes it easier for me to get around. So to your point, we end up using universal design and accessibility a lot more than we ever think we do. Universal design has come from a lot of different purposes. If you use voice dictation on your remote control for your television, that was started because of somebody with a mobility issue. That was started because of disability. If you watch football and you see the quarterback go into a huddle, that was started because Gallaudet University had sign language in their football team. If you watch the umpire in a baseball game put up 3 fingers for 3 balls and 2 fingers for 2 strikes, again, that's an accommodation for a disability audience. You don't think about it. And so when you start realizing the breadth of accommodation and technology and accessibility and where we've come from, it's amazing to think about where we're going. The example that I talked about in our meeting last week was Microsoft. Microsoft has built a company whose stock price has exploded in the last 11, 12 years because they built with inclusivity in mind, meaning they're hiring people with disabilities, They're speaking to people with disabilities through their technology. They're selling products, physical products to people with disabilities so that it's more inclusive. When you build with accessibility in mind, you open up your marketplace. You open up your products and services to a much larger economic world. And that's really, really important. When we talk about the return on investment for including people with disabilities in corporate America, we mention the $1 trillion in buying power that people with disabilities have. And then we say how underrepresented we still are at 70% under and unemployed. And imagine that 1 trillion becoming 2 trillion in the US and what that could do for our economy. So if I'm a business out there, and I am a business out there owning Our Ability Incorporated, we're building products for disability in mind, knowing full well that they're going to have other universal purposes. We know fully that our ableist language filter will help everybody in opening inclusive language. We know that our the way that we're going to communicate in finding a job that we're building for people with disabilities can be used by LinkedIn and Indeed in time. We know that. And so as long as we build with our community in mind, we know that it works for every community, which opens us up to a greater economic impact, and we're not alone. And that's what I like to share with as many people as will listen.
Well, and I think, not even talking about the dollar amount, we can talk about the $1 trillion buying power. And also one of the things that as business owners we're looking for, especially in our consumer market, is loyalty, right? And so when you have a business that is directly and overtly saying, hey, we want to be sure that we are meeting the needs of our community, and that means everybody, and ensuring that accessibility is not just part of what they do, but it is threaded through everything they do. Really, they have a customer base that will continue to grow, and really you don't see a lot of fall off from that, which is also just another really fantastic statistic when we're talking about businesses. And so when I think about the questions that I've had specifically to me, and one of them is, where do I start? Where do I even start? Because it feels like such a huge nut to crack, right? Like, are we looking at the website first? Are we looking at, how we're connecting with email and documents? And I usually say, it's not necessarily where you start, but just make sure you start, right? Yeah. And then things will start to all kind of streamline in a way that's like, okay, this makes sense that if we start here, then we're going to go in this direction. And then it becomes very much, like you said, it is from the inception of when you do something, it makes it a lot easier. When you're trying to unroll that spool and re-roll it, it becomes more difficult. But if you start, and regardless of where you start, you're going to get to the overall mission. If you had advice for anyone who is thinking, "Oh my gosh, I don't know if my website is accessible. I built it myself, and I don't remember if this was part of it." What's your advice on the place to start for whether it's a business person or even someone who's posting something, a teenager on social media of some sort? Where do they start?
I think the first place that you start is internally and externally. Internally within yourself, ask yourself this question: if you knew that your best client, your best friend, your best employee, your best consumer were mobility, deaf, blind, neurodiverse, if you knew that your best, whatever, 80% of your business were coming from one entity that had a disability, what would you do for that one person? You would do anything for that one person. And so since you don't know who your future clients are going to be, you should be doing that anyway, right? Because that is the possibility. So you start internally, ask yourself that question: am I doing the right thing if my client, my best friend, my whatever is would need a screen reader, or would need ASL, or would need, and go down that path. So ask yourself internally that question. Then externally, if you've got a small business website, if you've got a mom and pop website, if you're a small mid-sized business here in the capital region or in New York State or New York City, or you're a major Fortune 100 company. There are accessibility checkers out there. Microsoft has a good one. There are organizations like ours that can help you pretty instantly run through an audit of yourself. Where are you? Where are your pages? Where is your email process? Where is your documentation? If you have legal documents that go out, you must be compliant with Section 508. If you do not have a process in place and are auditing randomly some of those documents that go, you're making a massive mistake. If you're not auditing your HTML pages, you're making a massive mistake. You put yourself at litigation harm. So there are external checklists that you can use and you should use, and there's entities like us and others that can assist you with that. I implore you to do that, do that on a regular basis, and so that you're able to go through that process. So it's really a twofold: internal within yourself, who's my best client, who's my best friend, who's my best whatever, and then externally go through the process of a self-audit, use the accessibility checkers or organizations like ours, and do it on a regular basis so that you don't get caught in a situation that you don't want to be in. Again, America loves a comeback story, right? We will forgive an awful lot. It's okay not to know, but once you do know, that's where you need to pivot and make the change. And then you can even market around that pivot and should, right? America loves a comeback story, and this is part of that conversation.
Such good points. And, we talk about like doing it often. This is not a one and done. Accessibility is not a static thing. You don't check the box and say, okay, well, I did that and now I don't have to do it again. It is an ongoing organic process. And when I think about the word pivot, right, I feel like that was the word of 2020, 2021, as the world shut down and how are businesses pivoting. And I think that's such a good point, right? Because if you have to make a huge sweeping change and you are doing it from the lens of accessibility, the way that marketing that change and that strategy, of course, I will say, can best be an example by when Microsoft introduced the console, the gaming console. And of course, I am not a sports person, so I feel like it might have been a Super Bowl ad when it first came out. It felt like maybe it was around a holiday, but I remember when that commercial came out and just the amount of information and feedback that I got, like, did you see it? Did you see it? And how cool it was. And it was, not only was it solving for accessibility, but it was solving for a different demographic, right? Because oftentimes we think about, well, especially when we're talking about technology, if we're talking about the web or documents, we're talking about a much older professional demographic, but this was geared towards gamers, right? Who can be any age. There's a group that's like the Silver Streakers, who are gamers in their 70s, who are phenomenal. But this is something, this console was literally, no pun intended, a game changer, right? It was something that was developed so that customization could be made in the gaming world. And as we've seen with different groups that we've worked with, even here in Albany, it can also be modified to use for music, which is like the perfect example of how accessibility is wasn't just this one thing. It wasn't just this one console. The console itself is able to be adapted and adapted and adapted in a way that will grow with whether it's a person who's gaming or how they're using it throughout their lifetime. So when I think about the marketing power of accessibility, it is truly a change that will impact every area of your business. And so I know we could probably talk about this for hours and hours, but let's kind of sign off in a way where we talk about how it is that if we're starting with the internal and external evaluation and we're getting into the groove of things, and then we hit a roadblock, because that happens often, right? We see something else, and with the speed of technology, even we see something that's like, wow, that looks really cool. I want to do this on my site, or I want to do this in my business. And it's not it's not going to be an accessible transition. What are the resources that are available, and also like what are some of the pieces of advice or experience that you can give, because those barriers are going to come up, those big roadblocks to something you want to do that isn't fully ready to be released is there. What should people do when this happens?
I think the best thing to do here is educate yourself. So let me give you a personal example. When we built our Jobsability portal the first time 3 years ago, we built the first version. We sent it. We outsourced it to 3 or 4 people that we knew used screen readers, and we got a variety of feedback back. We felt comfortable that it was compliant. And then over the year, we received other candidates that came into the system that were using screen readers saying it wasn't working for them. So compliance versus not working for them. We started listening to the not working for them because that's our audience. And so then we go back in and figure out, okay, what isn't working? How can we improve it? And that's really, really important. So the first piece of advice is listen to your audience and question yourself. And when I said to everybody here before, there are entities out there that have plugins or overlays that say they're quote compliant for you. They're not necessarily, and they're quite frankly hated at times. Question yourself, question the process, re-engage in the process, and then be open to making change. And that's really key. And then finally, what I would say, seek out 2 or 3 partners that you can speak to on a regular basis that you can get feedback on accessibility. Accessibility, like life, like disability, like the human experience, is fluid. We are all moving rapidly. Technology is being built rapidly. Just look at the changes that have happened in the last 6 months with communication and OpenAI and ChatGPT. Because technology is changing rapidly, so will accommodation and so will accessibility. And so be aware of that, but also don't be afraid of it. Because as I said at the beginning, imagine your best client, your best friend, your best whatever is somebody that utilizes it. You would do anything for that individual. And so why wouldn't you do this in general? And to your point about the console, it's exactly right. I will tell you a personal story. At the time when that console came out, my child had a Sony product. I loved the Xbox console, but it wouldn't work with the Sony product. And so there's a situation where I lose as a consumer with a disability, but I openly applauded Microsoft and the Xbox and what they were doing. And then ultimately, my son bought an Xbox, right? And so that's a product win for Microsoft. That's a product win for the Robinson family. And it's a product win in general because accessibility opened up a marketplace. I'm not going to be a silver gamer. That's not going to happen. But it does give an example of what accessibility can open up and should open up, and we're proud to be a small part of that.
Oh yeah, and and just in thinking about that, I mean, eventually you got to the full Microsoft product. So I mean, what they did there was just genius. I mean, really, when you think about the ability, like I think about it in changing from an Android to an iPhone, which I did recently, which is not necessarily going as smoothly as I would like, but I ended up going to the iPhone because of the features that it had that were available to me that I really needed. So it's like we have the ability to really change the way people think about the products that they use, how they use them, and how they're going to use them long term. So I really do love that idea, and how like not only is it accessibility for now, it's accessibility for future. And as we've seen, a couple of things, right? We're going to see that technology is going to keep moving and maybe solving some of the other issues that we're having. And then also, I love that we are constantly being informed of new needs, right? And so when we talk about lived experience, right, your example of the difference between compliance and the end user experience is huge, because we can be compliant with a bunch of things, but if it's not really reaching our audience and our audience really still can't use it, then it's we're not meeting the need. And when we are open to hearing what else is needed, that is going to change the way that we do business in a very positive way, because we're going to continue to be really reaching a wider and wider audience. So I appreciate all of your advice and experience and feedback. Again, I think we could talk about this forever. It is always a pleasure to talk with you, John, and I can't wait to talk to you again.
Catherine, thank you so much. Thank you, DRNY, very much for this.
Empire State of Rights has been brought to you by Disability Rights New York, your source for disability rights and advocacy. If you enjoyed our program, make sure to subscribe, like, and share this post. The video for this episode is available on our YouTube channel with closed captioning and ASL interpretation. If there is a subject you would like us to discuss, please email podcast@drny.org or comment below. For more Empire State of Rights, follow us on Apple Podcasts, Spotify, and YouTube.